Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Overmars. I am a communications advisor at the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today for this important session taking place during Nova Scotia Human Rights Week. I do want to begin by acknowledging that we're participating in this session virtually in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. Mi'kmaq have made these lands their home since time immemorial, and they are the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. Our relationships in Mi'kma'ki are governed by the treaties of peace and friendship, and we are all treaty people. The Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission acknowledges such Mi'kmaq wisdom as Msit No'kmaq, meaning all my relations, which values the inherent interconnectivity of all things. And it's our hope that sessions like these help to raise awareness and understanding, creating bridges of learning and curiosity, and to help to foster closer, more respectful relationships. I would also like to acknowledge that the Human Rights Commission has a deep thanks deserving to people of African descent within Nova Scotia whose advocacy and leadership in pursuit of equity and justice, not only for members of the African Nova Scotian and Black communities in Nova Scotia, but for all communities. Their work has helped to advance greater understanding and inclusion of all people, and their leadership actually led to the establishment of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission and the drafting of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act. Also, I do want to acknowledge the connection between the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission's mandate of education to the Mi'kmaq people. It was not until the Donald Marshall Jr. inquiry and subsequent report and recommendations that it was recommended the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission build upon its mandate to protect human rights through a formal dispute resolution process to also include a mandate of education and awareness raising across the province of the rights of all people. This education mandate is a critical part of the Commission's work, and sessions like this are efforts to raise awareness of significant human rights issues, and it's due to the advocacy of and work and spirit of persons like Donald Marshall Jr. that we have the opportunity to do this work. I will introduce our presenter in just a moment, but I wanted to let folks know that we do have ASL interpretation on the call, and if you wish to spotlight the ASL interpreter at any point, you can do so. I'd also like to advise that closed captioning is enabled on this call, and you can turn that on using the closed caption button at the bottom of the screen. Near to that button at the bottom of the screen, you'll also see a Q&A box. That would be the means of engagement throughout this presentation. So if you wish to submit a question at any point, our presenter will allow some time at the end to turn to those questions and address any of them. And without further ado, want to introduce our presenter today. Semisel San is a Mi'kmaq cultural liaison with the Nova Scotia Department of Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage. And it's my pleasure to introduce Semisel and ask him to present on the topic of who are the Mi'kmaq. So without further ado, Semisel, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, Alan, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here today, and thank you, folks. Thank you, folks, for wanting to attend this session. I see that there's 38 people, 39 now people online, and that's just wonderful. That makes my heart so happy. I'm gonna share my screen. Right. Just right. So hopefully everyone can see that.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. As Jeff mentioned, there's going to be some opportunity at the end for questions. You can just enter your questions into the chat there, or you can just, I don't know if they have control over the mics, Jeff. They can just ask. If not, just pop them in the chat. But we'll save that till the end just because I can't see the chat when I'm in presenter mode. So we'll just get through the presentation and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions. So Julida, welcome to all of you. Welcome everyone to the session. Who are the Mi'kmaq or Wenik Ulnook? My name is Semisel San. As mentioned in my introduction, I'm the Mi'kmaq Cultural Liaison for Community Culture, Tourism, and Heritage. A little bit about myself. I am originally from here in Mi'kmaq. I grew up in Eskizoni. I was born and raised in Eskizoni First Nation. That's my home community. And then I went away for school. I did my Bachelor of Social Work at Dalhousie, and then from Dalhousie, I now live in the Truro area. My Western education background, as I mentioned, is in social work. So I'm currently enrolled in the Masters of Social Work program in an Indigenous field of study through Wilfrid Laurier University. And that program is a unique program. It's a first program in Canada that focuses on master's level Indigenous social work that focuses on holistic healing and traditional and modern practices of Indigenous folks. So I'm really excited to be in that program. That's my Western education. My traditional education, I guess you can call it, or my Mi'kmaq education, comes from being in community, living in community throughout my life. My family has taught me a lot. My aunts and uncles and my grandparents and elders from community. And just my community as a whole. I owe all that I know to them and my community. What else? I think that should be good. Talking about myself there. And so this presentation, I've created based on the questions folks had that would approach me with all these questions. And so the more popular questions, I just decided to turn them into a presentation. So the outline is Mi'kmaq and Mi'kmaq. So just exploring a little bit about the Mi'kmaq relationship to this territory. And then some Ulnui Sudi. So we'll touch a little bit on the language, the 7 districts of Mi'kmaq, the Sante Mawiomi, or the Mi'kmaq Grand Council, which is the original form of governance here in Mi'kmaq. And then we'll explore a little bit of the Wabanaki and the Wabanaki Confederacy, and then community and community roles, spirituality, Msit No'kmaq, just as Jeff mentioned a little bit there earlier, and Netukulimk. So those are the concept of Netukulimk. And really, this is all just, we have an hour here today. This is all just really surface level stuff. Each of these points can be an entire day-long session on their own. So we're just going to be just skimming through it on a surface level. But if you have any further questions, you can contact Jeff, and he can share with you my contact information. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any more questions, or if you're curious on some of these things that I talked about that we weren't able to fully cover. Just reach out to me. And so we have Mi'kmaq, the land of the Mi'kmaq. This is a cool sign that I really appreciate when you're coming in from New Brunswick into Nova Scotia. There was this sign put up several years ago, and it always just warms my heart when I see it. And so Mi'kmaq is the home of the Mi'kmaq. The Mi'kmaq have been rooted in this territory for over 13,000 years. Um, and that's known through oral traditions, but also through Western science. It's been proven that, we have such an ancient relationship to this territory. In fact, one of the oldest archaeological dig sites in North America is found here in Mi'kmaq, located at Dibert, Nova Scotia. And so, they've unearthed many, many artifacts dating back 13,000 years. And then all other sites throughout Mi'kmaq, artifacts have been unearthed after the 13,000 years. So there's some 6,000-year-old sites, 8,000-year-old sites, and so on. So it's been consistent throughout time that we've had this sacred relationship to this territory as Mi'kmaq. And we lived and moved throughout the land with sophistication, right? Utilizing and understanding the richness of this territory. Books often say that we were semi-nomadic people, that we kind of just wandered around Mi'kmaq, but there was such a huge purpose in the way we wandered, in the way we moved throughout this territory. There was a level of sophistication, right, and an understanding and a reciprocity between the people and the land. And so much so that even our language, it derives from the interconnectedness and the ecological experience that the Mi'kmaq have with the landscape, right? Our language, in a sense, has sprouted from this territory. Elder Ernest Johnson always talks about, the interconnectedness between language, the land, and spirit. Those are the three huge elements that make up the language. And so this is a visual of North America, or as we call it, Turtle Island, north of Turtle Island. As you can see, it was 21,000 years ago. It was covered in ice. There was an ice age that happened, and over time, the ice started to melt to roughly about 14,000 years ago. The environment was a lot like today. It was warm. We had our cold moments, but for the most part, it was warm. And then all of a sudden, there was like a cold snap that happened. And they call the cold snap a younger Dryas, where almost overnight, another ice age came upon this territory. And it was during this time, with the younger Dryas ice age, that those artifacts from the Dibert site are dated back to. So it's been quite a bit of time. And then to what we have today and how it looks like today. And these maps and a lot of the visuals that I use today were created by Dr. Elder Gerald Glode, who is a former colleague of mine. He's a well-respected elder and a knowledgeable elder in Mi'kmaq community. And he's an artist, a beautiful artist. And so a lot of my visuals come from Gerald and even in my teachings as well. I learned a lot from Gerald, so I just want to give him a shout out. Dr. Bernie Francis and Sable, they talk about the concept of Wajis Khaliadig, that we have grown up from this earth, that we've, as Mi'kmaq, sprouted like the trees and the plants and the animals. We sprouted from Mi'kmaq. This is the core of our location. And this is just a beautiful example of a nice visual of that concept, which is Khaliadi. And I mentioned the artifacts that were unearthed. So this picture here was of one of my visits at the Nova Scotia Museum, where we were able to spend some time with the artifacts, and you can see just the amount of artifacts that were found. And this is just a small portion of them. Um, when I first heard about the DeBerg dig site prior to working with Mi'kmaq DeBerg Cultural Center, I've always just pictured, it was like one or two or three arrowheads that were found kind of thing, but it was just the volume was just extraordinary, right? It demonstrates the pockets of communities that lived all along Belmont area and the DeBerg area um, that it was highly populated. This one here is 11,000-year-old spear point. Like I said, these are hosted at the Nova Scotia Museum. And then these are from the other collections. The one on the left is from Indian Gardens. There's also a Port Jolly collection. And then this one here is the DeBerg collection as well, but these ones specifically are hosted at the Museum of History in Ottawa. So we had an opportunity to visit those, and you can just see the volume of artifacts all along the room here. And if you were to turn around, there's another row of tables there too. So it's just mind blowing and interesting to look at, the level of sophistication um, creating those arrowheads and the type of stone that they used and where they would have got it. It's just so beautiful. And this visual here talks about, again, it's a Gerald Glode visual, but it's over here in the yellow symbolizes us in this current generation. And then the ones in the blue is the generation since European contact. And then the red is the generation, 665 generations, if you do the calculations dating back to 13,000 years ago. So again, just that ancient sacred relationship between place and the people. In the Mi'kmaq language, it's a part of the broader Algonquin language family. Its ancestral language to so it's Proto-Algonquin, and it's distinguished from many other languages for being verb-based, like other languages that fall under the Algonquin language family. It's a verb-based language, meaning that the language expresses and emphasizes an active or transitional state of being in existence. So through the language, it tells us that the world around us is in a constant state of motion. The language is centered in what's happening in the environment around you, which is different than English, which is a noun-based language, a noun-centered language, right? Verb-based language is just it's in that constant state of flux. And as I mentioned, the heart of the culture is the language. The Mi'kmaq language is rich with unique teachings that are specific to this territory, this area. There's a lot of humor, and it speaks to our worldview. And it's a link to our past, and it's the core of who we are today, but it also gives us the direction on how we proceed into the future. And so it's really important to honor that and to continue to preserve the language. Oral traditions were an oral tradition heavy type of people. The gift of speaking and listening played an important role in the preservation and transference of culture and history. And it being verb-based, when you say a word in Mi'kmaq or a sentence, if you close your eyes and you listen, you'll see what's happening because it's a verb-based language. So it adds that layer of experience. And, when you're sharing a story to someone in the language, it really sticks to you. And so it's easy to pass on oral traditions if you're doing it from a language perspective because it's a verb-based language. So cool. And so, again, this is a Gerald Glode visual, but it just shows, you know, it demonstrates what I'm saying. So, this is a list of the Mi'kmaq 13 moons. So traditionally, we would follow 13 moons or 13 months. The Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar that we follow today, was incorporated into 1500. So it's quite recent. But traditionally, we followed the 13 moons. And each moon tells you what's happening in the environment around you. So, for example, March is our New Year, Silkewigus, the maple sugar moon. So our New Year isn't in January; it's in March, and it's a time when things are coming back to life after winter. You know, everything around us is coming back to life, and so that's when we would celebrate our New Year. Silkewigus is March, and it's also known as the maple sugar moon. So it tells you that silk that at this time it would be ideal to gather maple sugar from the trees, and it's also a good time to harvest thick bark. And so we would use thick bark for canoes or wigwams or anything that you needed a durable structure. We would use the bark, and it's at this time of the year the only time of the year where you'd be able to harvest thick bark. April is Benatmuigus. Benatmuigus is the bird laying egg moon. So it's an indicator that at this time, at this moon, is when birds are out there laying their eggs, So we weren't as fortunate traditionally to have grocery stores. And if you're craving eggs, you can just run down to the superstore and get a dozen of eggs, and there you have it. It was just a certain time of year when we'd be able to harvest eggs, and it would be Benatmuigus. May is a Tolchewigus. The Tolchewigus means frog croaking moon. So it's a time where the frogs are croaking. You hear the spring peepers coming out of hibernation, and the light bugs are first coming out at this time. And there's indicators that follow those as well. We won't get into that, but then we have June. June is Nibinigus. Nibinigus tells you that it's a time of the year where leaves are in full blossom. And so then we have July, Beskewigus. Beskewigus is birds. It's a time when birds shed their feathers, but also animals too. They start shedding their fur. All that winter fur is coming off, and in preparation for the hotter months. And so again, it tells you what's happening in the environment at that moon. Then we have August, which is Kisiwegowigus, ripening time or ripening moon. And so, our medicines, our plants, berries, it's at this time where you're able to pick them and everything's ready, everything's juicy, it's ripened, right? And then we have the 13th moon, which is Chigus, which is the great moon. And really, it's just honoring at this time of year. You'll notice the moon looks a lot bigger than it normally is, and it's because of the heat that's coming off of the Mother Earth, that's creating moisture in the air, moisture in the atmosphere, and that moisture serves almost like a magnifying glass, that causes the moon to look bigger than it actually is. And so Chigus means the great moon or the grand moon. And then we have September. Wigumkewigus is mate calling time. So Wigumtwen is when you're calling someone in Mi'kmaq. If you break the word down, Wigumt. And so it's the mate calling time or the moose calling time. That's when a lot of time like the animals are getting ready to mate. And then we have October, Wige goose. Wigo is fat, like food fat, any type of fat is Wigo. So Wigo goose is it's a time that tells you that at this moon, um, the animals and the resources around us are at its prime time. That they're filled with fat because they're preparing for the winter months. So, like the moose, for example, it's an ideal time to hunt for moose because that's when the meat and everything it's just ready. It's juicy. And then November we have Geptigoy goose. Geptigoy goose is a moon where rivers and the waters are about to freeze. In the language, when something is geptig, it means it's frozen on the surface level. It's not frozen solid. If it's frozen solid, we would call it giltig. But geptig is just that surface level. So it's telling you that there's a shift in what's happening around you in terms of weather. And then December we have Gesigawigus, which is the chief moon. Gesig is the winter, so it's a winter moon. And then we have January back up here is Bunamojuwigus, which is the spawn of the Tommy codfish. And Elder Gerald Glode shared with me this teaching on collecting Tommy cod at this moon is when the tides would come in, the winter tides would come in. Um, there would be a lot of icebergs along the shore, and then the Tommy cods would come in with the tides. But then when the tides come back out, that the Tommy cods would get caught up in the icebergs along the shore, and so you can just walk along the shore and pick Tommy cod as you go. And then February is Abuganajit, and Abuganajit has several meanings. Um, it's an indicator that it's the final um, moon where you're going to be experiencing a harsh winter. That the moons after that start to get warmer. So Bokchiabu Akoi in Mi'kmaq is it's starting to warm up. Abugunabimk is when you're having a hard time to see because it's so bright and snowy, and so that tells you a little bit about the month too. But Abugunajit is also a winter spirit. It's some would say the god of winter, and Abugunajit spirit can be found in a lot of our legends. And there was a time when Glooskap fought Abugunajit and lost, and then Glooskap had to travel down south to get the goddess of summer to challenge the god of winter, Abugunajit, and they won. And so they told Abugunajit, you can only come back. You're welcome to come back, but don't stay for 1,000 years. You're only allowed to come back once per season. And so we have that winter season, right? That's where that comes from. And so this is just a quick example of how the language is so interconnected with spirit and the land. And examples like these can be found throughout the language. Everything you say is almost like you have a language, but then there's an additional layer of the language behind what you're saying. And it's beautiful. As I mentioned, we're a part of the broader Algonquin language family. So we have the Plains Algonquin out west. Then we have the Central Algonquin language family. And then we have the Eastern Algonquin language family, which is where Mi'kmaq fall under. And it's cool. So right now, with my master's program, we're in the Central Algonquin language territory, and the elders and the professors that teach in the program all speak Anishinaabe or Ojibwe. And so I've been picking and I've been learning Ojibwe, and it's easy for me to pick up because the language structure is so similar to Mi'kmaq. And yeah, it's just cool to be able to see that relationship. And then we have Mi'kma'ki. So Mi'kma'ki is composed of 7 districts. So we have Cape Breton and Nova Scotia, Unama'ki and Dahamkook. That's one district. So that's the district where I'm from. And then we have Eskigewagik, which is the skin dressers territory over here. And on to the other side, we have Ebeguit and Pictou. So like PEI in the Pictou Landing area is another territory. Then we have the Sebeganegadig district over here. And if you move further down, you would have the Gespugik district, which means last flow. And Sebeganegadig means the wild potato area. And then over here to this area, we have the Siganik district, which is the drainage area. And then finally, we have Gespig, the last land. And so the number 7 is so sacred in Mi'kmaq worldview. 7 is a sacred number. It goes back to our creation story and how creation was created through 7 parts. And with those 7 parts came the 7 sparks of the fire. And from the 7 sparks of the fire formed 7 original families. And within those 7 original families, one of the 7 migrated to Mi'kma'ki, and from the 7 of those families created the 7 districts. And so, yeah, that's where our districts come from, and that's how we govern our areas, rather than the traditional like borders that the government created. We go by in accordance to the 7 districts. And so in Nova Scotia specifically, we have 13 Mi'kmaq governance communities, and then we have 29 satellite communities. And I apologize, this is a map I drew from Google, and some of the spellings in the names here are a little outdated. We haven't had an updated map recently. But just to give you an idea, these are the 13 governance communities and the satellite communities. And so before, like I mentioned, we utilized all areas of Mi'kma'ki. In the summertime, we would be along the coasts in large communities. And in the winter months, we would move inland and break off into smaller pockets of families throughout the winter. And then come spring and summer again, we'd be moving back to the coast. So we're always moving, and we would never move back to the same area where we were last season. We were always mindful of the resources that we took from that area. And so we'd always give a chance for that area to replenish itself for regrowth, and so we wouldn't go back there. And then in the 1940s, there was a centralization policy that the government imposed on the Mi'kmaq, and sent so the Cape Breton area, the Mi'kmaq were all sent to one community in Eskizoni. That's where I'm from, and that's why Eskizoni is the largest Mi'kmaq community, because during centralization, they took everyone from the surrounding communities and jammed them into one community in Eskizoni. And in the mainland, all the communities were sent to Wabanaki into one central reserve. And yeah, and from that came these 13 communities. And so we lost a lot of land and territory around those times, and that's why we live in reservations today and not freely as how we used to before. And then over here you have just a broader picture of where the communities are located today. Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, PEI, Quebec. And we also have some communities in the northern part of Maine as well. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing great. All right, so this is the Sakte Maoyomi. We're going to get into the Sante Maoyomi, the Mi'kmaq Grand Council. And as I mentioned in the introduction, this is our original form of governance, was the Mi'kmaq Grand Council. And it's made up of leaders from all the 7 districts of Mi'kma'ki. So each of the 7 districts have representatives that sit within the Mi'kmaq Grand Council. Traditionally, the Grand Council were responsible for leading ceremonies for marriages, birthing ceremonies, funerals, settling disputes, child welfare, negotiations, warfare, gatherings, sharing traditional knowledge, treaties, the list, whatever that needed to be governed was handled by the Grand Council. And this was this had been our original form of governance up until, again, around the 50s, 60s, where the government tried to dismantle the Grand Council, and in return encouraged us to utilize their definition of chief and council leadership through elections and stuff like that. And so today we have the traditional Grand Council still exists, and they also work alongside the Indian Act chief and councils, which were, like I said, incorporated in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so the Indian Act chief and councils, they have jurisdiction within each of their reservations. So Eskizoni, for example, our chief is Chief Leroy. So Chief Leroy and his council, their jurisdiction is within Eskizoni. Member 2 has their own chief and council. Chapel Island has their own chief and council. All our communities have their own chief and councils that are responsible for that specific community. Whereas the Grand Council has jurisdiction all across Mi'kma'ki, from Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland, Quebec area, New Brunswick, and so their role and responsibility falls everywhere, not just within communities. And so that's one of the bigger differences between the two. This is a picture I took of it was at the Treaty Day celebrations in Halifax this year. And you can see this is our Grand Chief, our current Grand Chief, Norman Slibway. And so the Grand Council is consists of captains, G-Captain, Badus, Grand Council women, and Gisama, which is the Grand Chief. So the captains, there's many captains, and captains are leaders and family designates that inform council and community members of matters involving our nations. So a lot of the different families from each communities would have a designated captain within that area, within that family system, to represent on the Grand Council. And so there's many captains, and the captains are the ones you'll see wearing the blue sash, like over here in the picture, the light blue. And then we have a G-Captain. G-Captain is like a grand captain, which is there's one person in that role. And they're the designated representative for all captains. So there's captains and then one grand captain. And then we have a Badus. And the Badus is a single person role. And that role, the Badus is responsible for sharing traditional knowledge, history, and keeping our communities informed of what's going on. Traditionally, they're the wampum holder. They're also the knowledge keeper. So the Badus has a very special role within the Grand Council. And then we have Grand Council women. So women in council, they serve as support. They support the entire council. There are prayer leaders, or ceremony leaders, or they lead in song. They help the community a lot in other ways through their special gifts as women. And then we have the Jisarama, which is the Grand Chief, and that's a one-person role as well, the Jisarama. And a lot of times these roles, traditionally and still today, are hereditary. And so you're not voted in, really like the chief and council system where you have elections every 2 or every 4 years. This is something where once you're in the role, you're in there for life. It's a lifetime role. You don't get paid. You don't get any money from it. It's all volunteer. You're doing it for the love of your nation. And so, yeah. So again, the Sante Mawiomi, the Grand Council, and it's a very grassroots governance structure. So we have the individuals and families. That's the core of the Grand Council, the communities. Then we have the captains. Then we have the Grand Captain. We have the Badus and the Grand Chief. So just some pictures. Again, this was from the Treaty Day. This is our current Grand Chief, Norman Sliboy. And Norman, if you see right here, this is Gabriel Sliboy, who was the Grand Chief in the early 1900s, and that would have been our current Grand Chief's grandfather. And over here is the Badus, which would have been the great grandfather of our current Badus. So again, just seeing that hereditary roles being passed down. In my family, this is my uncle Mike, my mom's brother. He serves as a captain and a representative from the Wabanaki district, specifically from the community of Eskizoni. And over here we have G Captain, our Grand Captain, Andledeni. And before him, his father was also Grand Captain and so forth, right? And so over here we have our current Badus. And right here is another Captain, Stephen Augustine. So I just want to put some visuals out there so you can recognize some faces. And of course, some women. And women are so important in our leadership. You know, women had such a big role in the Grand Council up until contact, where, the settlers were surprised to see that our society was a matrilineal society where women were in leadership. And so gradually over time through colonization, women were kind of pushed off to the side, and folks would only negotiate and have conversations with the men. And so they tried to erase that leadership role amongst women, but it still continues to exist today. And again, just another picture I got offline of some of the counts, some of the captains. And then we have the Wabanaki Confederacy. And so the Wabanaki Confederacy is a political union of like-minded nations who collectively work together to protect the land, language, and people. It's an alliance, really. It's the confederacy that existed prior to even European contact and still continues to today. And so the Mi'kmaq Nation is a part of a group of First Nations in the eastern side of Turtle Island, and together we formed an alliance. So it's called the Wabanaki Confederacy. And Wabanaki translates to the people of the dawn, and Wabanaki translates to the land of the dawn. So we're the first people that we get to greet the sun every morning. We're the first people on the east side that get to greet the sun, and that's a special thing to be able to do. As I mentioned, Mi'kmaq Ulnuk, or known as my relations, or the ones who speak the common language. So the Mi'kmaq are part of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Wolastoq, the Penobscot, and the Passamaquoddy, and the Abenaki. So together we form the Wabanaki Confederacy. And you can see over here, just to map a little visual of all the nations that are involved in the Wabanaki Confederacy. So the green is Mi'kmaq, beige is Maliseet, gold is the Penobscot. Then we have the Passamaquoddy in the rosish color. Then we have in the light purple and dark purple are the Abenaki East and Abenaki West. And so together we formed the Wabanaki Confederacy, which still exists today. So the Grand Council sits, has a seat at the table of the Wabanaki Confederacy. And then we have our communities. I want to touch a little bit about our communities and just how, if you haven't had an opportunity to visit a community, I encourage you to do so. You know, there's always different events happening, events that are open to the public, such as Maui Omis. People always feel that they're exclusive only to community, but they're public, and we encourage everyone and anyone who can attend to come and join us and to celebrate at our powwows or Maui Omis. We're just such a rich cultural heritage, and you really see that when you go to Maui Omis. Our communities have such rich connection to land. We're a resilient community, friendly. We love to gather. We love to have Weequabalting feasts. And there's a huge piece of humor. You'll always hear when you see a group of Ulnug, of Mi'kmaq gathering, almost every time you'll hear laughter. We're big on humor. Humor is a big part of who we are. Yeah, just a little bit about our communities there. And then our community roles. And so children, you know, children to us are most sacred. They're fresh from the creator, you know, they come from creation onto earth. They're so new to earth. They're our most sacred. They're our future leaders of our communities, and they're also our bridges to the future. And then we have women. As I mentioned, we're a matrilineal society. You know, we go to our women for decision making. You know, we go to our women for advice. We go to our women for everything. We consult our women, and then we act upon whatever the women say. They're givers of life, so they have such a unique ability to bring life into this earth, and that's so sacred, right? They have a strong connection to spirit. They're our caregivers and our providers. And then we have elders. Our elders are they support community. They're knowledge keepers, language keepers. They carry the wisdom. They're our teachers, and they bridge the past into the present, right, to help us to move forward into the future. And so, you know, we never used to have universities and colleges. Our elders were our universities and colleges. That's where we would get our wisdom and knowledge was from the elders. And so there's a huge respect for elders in Mi'kmaq community. And then we have two-spirited folks, folks who identify as to be a part of the LGBTQIA plus community, two spirits. So to have two spirits was considered to be sacred, you know, that to be able to have a spirit of a man and the spirit of a woman, masculine and feminine spirit within you was considered to be a sacred gift from the creator, right? There wasn't any shame around that. And so quite often our two-spirited community members were and are today still healers, are medics, you know, caregivers, and support community as a whole. And then we have men who are protectors, are providers, and they act upon whatever decisions are made by the women. And then we have Ginap, or warriors, and our warriors are just protectors of all life, and rights, and there are educators and are safe people. We think of warriors, you think about like the strong person ready for battle, but that's not the case. Warriors are someone who protect. We talk about Msit No'kmaq, all our relations. Those are the ones who protect Msit No'kmaq, that the children can go to and feel safe around, that women can go to and they know they'd be protected, that elders can go to them and rely on them, that two-spirit people can go to these warriors and feel safe and protected, and same with the men. So it's a different notion of what a true warrior is than what we're normally used to. And then we have spirituality. Spirituality, if you want to go in depth with spirituality, I guess the best place to start would be learning about the Mi'kmaq creation story. And you can find that online. There's some articles on it. There's videos on YouTube that you can learn about it. There's books. But in a nutshell, we believe that all life was created by one, which is Gisulk. And Gisulk is a gender-neutral term for the one who created us. So Gisulk. And then we acknowledge the sun, Naguset or Niskam, which is the giver of life, light, and heat. Without the sun, we wouldn't be here today. And so we honor that relationship with Naguset. And we have the moon, Depkunoset, the one who shines at night. And we acknowledge Depkunoset for the life cycle it offers. How we talked about the 13 moons, that moon is such an important piece to us in how we live our lives throughout the year. So we honor that. And then we recognize the living spirit within all things around us, so we treat all living things with respect. And again, that concept of Msit No'kmaq, all our relations. Quite often when you're in ceremony, you say Msit No'kmaq when you enter ceremony. When you leave ceremony, you say Msit No'kmaq. When you're praying, you finish off with Msit No'kmaq. We're always mindful of Msit No'kmaq, all our relations. And Msit No'kmaq captures us as people. So when we say Msit No'kmaq, we're mindful of us as humans. We're mindful of the humans of the past. All the work of our ancestors that make it possible for us to be here today. And we're also mindful of the next generations to come that aren't in the world yet when we say Msit No'kmaq, so we're mindful of them. We give thanks to our relations, our brothers and sisters that fly in the sky. That's Msit No'kmaq. Our two-legged brothers and sisters that walk the earth, the four-legged brothers and sisters that walk the earth, our brothers and sisters, our relations that live in the water. So we're mindful of that. We're mindful of our relations that live underground, so all the insects and the bugs and, the underground animals. So we're all mindful of that when we say Msit No'kmaq. So it goes beyond our human relations, but it's our spiritual relations. It's our relations to plants and animals and the whole life cycle. And again, spirituality is at the center of all we do. So this is a nice visual that Elder Gerald Glode created. So Msit No'kmaq or Gogamanos. As I mentioned, it acknowledges our connection to all that's around us. And you quite often hear the 7 generations, the next 7 generations. And this is a cool visual that talks about the Mi'kmaq understanding of generations and 7 generations. So 7 generations equals to 840 years. 1 generation is 120 years. So it's great-grandparent, grandparent, parent, and their child, and then the unborn, unborn of unborn, and unborn of unborn of unborn. So together, that's one generation. So it's 120 years. So when we think of when we talk about the next 7 generations, you're talking about 840 years plus. Netukulimk is another concept that's been at the forefront a lot lately. I'd say in the past decade, for the public. But Netukulimk is something that as Mi'kmaq we've practiced throughout our time. And I took a quote from the Unama'ki of Natural Resources on how they define Netukulimk. Netukulimk is the use of natural bounty provided by the Creator for self-support and well-being without jeopardizing the integrity, diversity, or productivity of the environment. When you're practicing Netukulimk, you only take what you need and leave the rest for the next 7 generations. And being mindful also of the state of the natural gifts that you're taking from. And so, you're always mindful of if you're harvesting whatever it is that you're harvesting from the natural world, you're always mindful of its current state, that if it's endangered, if it's not doing good, if the trees are sick, then you wouldn't take from them. You're always mindful of the next 7 generations, and you only take what you need. To not over harvest, to not be greedy. It's respectful sustainability, and it's centered in ceremony. And that's all I have. Walalio. Thank you. Thank you. In a nutshell, that is who are the Mi'kmaq when they go move. I'll start share my screen now.
Thank you so much, Semisel. Could listen to you all day. There are a number of folks that have submitted questions, some of which I believe you had addressed as you proceeded through the presentation, but you can click on the Q&A button yourself, perhaps, and then you should be able to read those and take a moment to peruse them, perhaps, and choose those that you're comfortable answering on screen. And I do want to let folks know that this session will be recorded. So if you don't hear your question answered, you can check back on the recording if you must go. We don't have to rush the ending, Semisel, so take your time with the questions.
Oh, okay, a lot of great questions. I'll do my best to honor and to answer them. And like I said, I'm not an expert. I just know what I know. Okay. First one. Where did the original ancestors come from before 13,000 years ago? That's a gray area a little bit. But if you look at linguistics, linguistics can kind of show you the footprints of our past, right? Through linguistics and language families and styles of language. And it tells you that so the Mi'kmaq 13,000 years ago, like I mentioned, we come from the Proto-Algonquin language family. So from like the language, we're also part of the Proto-Algonquin people. And so over time, they would have migrated through east. But before that, we would have stemmed from the west side. So I hope that answers that. Are we able to get a copy of this presentation afterwards? I think this presentation will be posted. Jeff was mentioning that it'll be accessible online for you to view. But in terms of the physical presentation, I don't share that just because all the pictures are personal and there's some pictures of my children on there and stuff. It's when I present, it's a form of ceremony, right? It's a piece of me that I'm sharing with you, and so I put a lot of love in and a lot of myself into the presentations, and so I won't share the slides, but the video will be posted online for you to see. Also, if you want to get more like the visuals and stuff that I talked about, you can also go to the Mi'kmaq Debert website. A lot of the stuff that I talked about today can be found on the website, and there's a bunch of resources that you can tap into from their website. Was Newfoundland always less populated than the other areas, or is it the very small number of communities there a result of colonization? I'm not sure. I'm not completely sure of the population of Newfoundland. Um, I do know there was a huge Mi'kmaq and Beothuk presence there. When I worked for Mi'kmaq de Bert, I had the privilege of visiting the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, and we got to view Frank Speck's collection. And Frank Speck was a researcher who spent a lot of time in Atlantic Canada, in especially in the Newfoundland area. So Frank Speck uh, recorded a lot and took pictures and wrote books specifically to that area and the population of that area. So if you Google Frank Speck, there's a lot of stuff that can answer that question. Do the band councils report to the Grand Council or are they the Grand Council? So the band councils are separate from the Grand Council, but they work together. They're all from the same community. They're all quite often from the same families and stuff like that. So they work side by side. They work really well together. I heard the Mi'kmaq were matriarchal society pre-colonial, where women led their communities. Did that change to colonialism? Yes, yes. So we were more matrilineal than matriarchal. Um, but yeah, and so it was even recorded in like if you look through some of like the Jesuit relations of like the 1600s, they talk about that and how when when the settlers arrived, they viewed that to be very savage. Like how could women lead a society? Like it was such a foreign concept to them, and so they begin to refuse to consult with ladies and women and stuff like that. And so gradually over time, um, if you look at like the history and documents, very little is recorded about women, and there's very little representation of women historically. But internally, we have always still kept that. And so, although from the outside it may look like a male dominant leadership, internally it's still very matrilineal. Our leaders for each family. Each family has clan mothers who are in charge of their clan and their families, and so we still go to them and utilize them today. And so the Grand Council is trying to reverse that now. We're at a time where it's safe, or we feel safe that we're able to bring our women at the forefront again, and that's what they're working towards now is to face it outward again because it's safe to do so. Uh, what is the best place to find the community event? Um, I'd say right now the best place to look is online. Like if you have social media accounts like Facebook or Instagram or X, um, all of the events that happen in community are posted online through social media. So you can just go into your search bar into your events and type in Mi'kmaq. There'll be many events that should pop up, any upcoming events. Um, Regarding humor, something I enjoy learning about is friendly competitiveness between similar cultures. Example, Canada and the United States, Austria and Germany, New Zealand and Australia. It can also happen on a micro scale. Example, how Chibuktuk is divided into neighborhoods that might poke fun at each other. I'm curious about similar sentiments between areas of Mi'kmaq. Thanks. Yeah, for sure. Um, it exists a little bit, but remember I talked about centralization and how we were kind of grouped in. So a lot of us in community are still tied to other communities. So we have relatives and families and friends from other communities. So it's a huge web of interconnectedness that's still very strong today. Um, I guess it comes out a lot in sports. A lot of friendly competitiveness comes out. You'll see it a lot in sports. We're big sports people. Why haven't the Mi'kmaq returned to a major? So yeah, just to echo what I mentioned, they're working to that. And women, um, even Geptons alone, Geptons is a colonial term that the Grand Council started to use. I'd say around like 16, 1700s. It was a time of like where there was a lot of military influence. It shifted, but before Geptons, it was called Niganusk. And Niganusk is just a term for leaders. And the Niganusk can be both male and female. My mother's people, Mi'kmaq, are from Newfoundland. Were they always there or did they migrate from other territories? I'm not sure really of how they got there. Again, just going back to the language, it kind of just we've migrated eastwards, and so I would guess from Cape Breton. And even if you look at the term Dahamkuk, Dahamkuk translates to the land across from you. So from Cape Breton to Newfoundland, it describes that it's the land across from Cape Breton. And so my understanding is that the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk have been there for a very long time as well. My family, actually, on my dad's side, comes from Conn River, and it wasn't until uh, around 1940s, 30s maybe. Um, there was a bad it was a bad time for Mi'kmaq to be there, and so the Grand Chief John Denny at the time sent out his son and a bunch of young Mi'kmaq from Eskizoni, Cape Breton, to go to Newfoundland and to bring the Mi'kmaq from Newfoundland back to Cape Breton because of the way they were being treated. And at that point, the Beothuk would have been all scalped. There was nothing left of the Beothuk, and so the Mi'kmaq, majority of them came to Cape Breton on that expedition from Grand Chief's son at the time, and so that would have been my dad's side of the family. Why is it called Eskigawagik, skin dressers territory? There was an abundance of resources around that area of Nova Scotia. And so, it was an ideal place to go if you needed any resources, including clothing. Um, that would be an ideal place to go shopping. I guess it was kind of like a mall, the way we go shopping mall today. You can always guarantee that you would be successful if you went on a hunt in that territory, that district. Do you have a movie or a YouTube video / documentary that you can recommend for us to watch together as a family? My kids and I are eager to learn. Mm, I can't think of any right now. No. That would be like a rich video to watch. It's more specific. There's a lot of specific documentaries on specific things, but yeah, I can't think of any Daniela off the top of my head. I'm sorry. All right, and that's all for the questions here, Jeff.
Thank you. Semisel, for taking the additional time to respond to those questions. I really appreciate all that you've shared with us today. I would also like to acknowledge and thank Monica for sticking around a little longer to address some of the questions as well. Very grateful and appreciate having the ASL available today, but also in the recording. Semisel, thank you so much. I would encourage folks who wish to find the recording of this video will be posted to the Commission's website within 24 hours. So if you go to the Human Rights Commission's website and look up Nova Scotia Human Rights Week, if you click on the event listing for this event, the recording will be there. Likewise, the previous events that have happened over the past week are all recorded and available for viewing on the Commission's website. So there's a rich repository now of excellent sessions, including this. So once again, Semisel, thank you so much for your teaching today and for your for agreeing to be here and share this presentation with us. I'd like to let folks know that there are 2 more events scheduled within the Human Rights Week sort of overflow on Friday the 13th. So you can check out the Commission's website for additional information and look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, Semisel.
You're welcome.